Okay, I think we are live. I hope we're live. So yeah, hello everybody. This is the first, discussion of Perdido Street Station, and also the first live discussion on this channel here. And I'm joined by 5 awesome people to discuss this with me. Maybe you can all very shortly introduce yourself and tell us who you are, what the awesome channels are that you're running. And maybe let's start with Raf and then just do the rounds.
Well, I'm Raf. I do have a channel called Raf Blutaxt. I do talk about fantasy, science fiction, and things that make me angry while I drink beer, which is usually what I do. And in this case, well, cheers.
Indeed, cheers. Enjoy.
Well, it
Mary.
is 9:30.
Yeah, that's right. You do the night shift here. Okay, next one. Mary.
My name is Mary. My channel is named Mary Reads to Live, and I talk about all kinds of genres of books, of reading. I'm an English teacher, so I really talk about fantasy and sci-fi and what they bring to the academic discussion and why you should teach them in the classroom. That's usually what I try to talk about, and plus just all the fantasy and sci-fi and other horror genre stuff that I really love. So I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, and be with all of you.
Great. Glad to have you. Varsha?
Hi, my name is Varsha. I run a tiny YouTube channel called Reading by the Rainy Mountain, where I also talk about books. I try, for the most part, to stick to books that I really love and talk about them in great detail.
Okay, great. Okay, next, Dan.
Sure, yeah. My name is Dan. I run a channel called the Black and Blue Collar Reader. I typically read adult and darker fantasy, historical fiction, and I'm happy to be here and discuss this one today.
Great. And the last but not least, Jarrod.
I'm Jarrod. I run the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and by the name, you can guess I read a lot of fantasy. So that's what I talk about. So it's very nice to meet you all in person.
Indeed, it is. Yeah, great. Okay. Will we start with some maybe first impressions about Perdido Street Station?
What the hell was my first impression?
Yeah. Definitely. It was kind of, I didn't know really what to expect. I've not read a book like this before. And so it was very interesting. And I was like hooked just from the descriptions and just how it was coming to cross, because I haven't read something like this before. So it was interesting. And I thought it was, I felt like I was in like a dystopian train wreck and I didn't want to look away. It's kind of how I felt. So.
I like this dystopian train wreck.
So far, none of the trains have been wrecked. I just want to point that out.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
Not yet.
Yeah, it's a book that has a lot to do with trains anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, I was just impressed that we got like a POV from a woman with an ant head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's a scarab. There's
it's like
differences.
Yeah,
yes.
That I'm sure entomologists would discuss in great detail.
Yeah.
And at first, I didn't think that was going to work for me, but the way that he wrote it, I was just very impressed. Like, you know, she does sign language and really got into, you know, with her art and things like that. As I kept reading, so at first I'm like, really, this woman has a scarab head, and this is something I've never really read before in fantasy, where somebody is, you know, half human, and this is new to me, really. And I at first I didn't like it, but then he just started fleshing her out a little more and writing more about, you know, how she interacts with people and her art, and I just was on board for it, as you know, as I kept reading along.
Yeah, I have to say as well, I mean, so far I really like it. I find the whole kind of like beetle woman thing is very intriguing in a way. I also think it's very well done how he describes the different sensory input that she gets. Not that her eyes work differently, also that she seems to be able to smell like almost like pheromones or something like that, and how she works the what does he call it? Not antennae, head legs that she kind of like works and
legs, yeah.
uses
she
for
does have
communication as well. No,
She does have both. She does have antennae and she does head legs. Have head
oh
legs.
yeah, of course, she has a
because
whole beetle on her head.
Yep,
Yeah,
it's the full
yeah,
scarab. It does have both.
yeah.
I thought,
Yeah,
I thought it how, yeah, and I thought how it really communicated her in the way she thought was very well written, I think, because there are differences in the way she sees the world and experiences the world, and we really get that across, right? Especially when you talk about her culture, and she's talking about how other people are doing things and how she perceives that. I think it's very interesting because I think, oh, hello.
Guest appearance.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting how they kind of put that into her art because she does see things a little differently, even for her own kind, which I thought was really cool. Like we get to see how she's even set apart from her own kind and how she's different from them. And so we get to see her culture through her eyes as an outsider, even though she's one of them. And I think that's really cool as well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I love how he starts off this novel with everything that he describes is very visceral, and it's like everything's bruised blood and terms like that really, like, it's all very biological description based, and I really love how he puts that into everything. That's how the description of the city came off, and even the map of the city looks like a brain almost, or a cell or something like that. And everything that gets described has to do with these like biological urban anatomies, and just a lot of description of, crap flowing in rivers and everything else that he describes in there. He retraces that throughout the whole book so far. He really gets into that and contrasts it with, as a difference from what you think of modern cities today as being like these, structures. Like I'm in New York right now. It's very grid-like. It's very structured, and it's quite a chaotic difference from that. I love how he started out that way.
Yeah. I also like how we enter the city, like that very first opening scene where we can really kind of like get this organic feel. No? It's as if this is an organism that has grown over a long, long time and is also partly already decaying almost. No? So it's really, very kind of like, what shall I say? Fascinating, but also grossing one out in equal measures, I think.
Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, yes, the way he does, I think it's deliberate the way he does build up, with the first bit being some of those few first-person narrative scenes that he has put in there between other, the normal third-person chapters. And that first-person introduction it kind of takes you, the reader, into the city from the outside and down into that city. And cities are important, of course, for Miebel in general. And I think this one, I mean, is very much, I guess, your European metropolis during like the 19th century industrial age, or obviously large cities in countries that are currently used to produce cheap goods and have open sewage and all of these things. And it's interesting what you said there about New York being very grid-like and stuff like that. Yes, but that's a very unique city experience you get in the US, for example. That's not how a lot of other cities work, and I think it's important to keep that in mind, because Miebel is British, and Miebel is Miebel is British, and London or Manchester or cities like that, in especially the 19th century, they are very much like what he's describing there in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think as well that London was probably his model for this. I'm living in Dublin. city that was founded by the Vikings, and no grid structure here. Like, I mean, you can completely forget that. No? So, yeah, we have people in the chat also commenting on the slightly gross aspects of this. No? Catherine saying there was a very gross moment early on, and I almost gave up on it, but I'm soldiering on and loving it. But also somebody is saying here, it's all about the transition zone between things. No.
So yeah, when you were discussing I believe it's the prologue, we're taking a boat ride into this city.
Yeah,
and we are on the outskirts. So I'm assuming a lot of this, transit. How about evolution? So we get to see the evolution of this city because we start in these outskirts. He starts describing nature, and then then he comes to like a tent city, and it starts to transition and grow into this huge metropolis. Like you actually get to see the evolution basically of this city because from the outskirts as you're going along this boat into the heart of this city. And I just I think evolution, I'm only on chapter 14, but there could be some underlying themes that that have to do with evolution found within this story.
Well, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that China Miéville has very often described himself as a Marxist and a communist, and that and his art is very much political in that regard. So a lot of the themes that you'll see in there can very well be read or maybe written through that kind of lens, which is why the city is so ugly and gross, and why you have, for example, the chapters about the what's it called, that underground paper, I keep forgetting the name. Yeah. I just can't remember the name of the paper right now. Something with 2 R's.
Renegade Rampant.
Renegade Rampant. All right. Yeah.
Renegade,
yeah. These elements are core to the story, and it's an interesting question. I think what kind of genre you would call this, because Miéville has, he has joked about writing a story in every possible genre throughout his life. Just to show, for example, that fantasy can do all kinds of different genres. Just because it's set in a fantasy world doesn't mean it's a fantasy story. And there's a question what kind of story this will be, what kind of genre you expect this to be. And I think that's an interesting question to ponder, because up to chapter 14, it has just begun. Things will go.
Oh yeah, we're only a quarter in, no? I mean,
I like it.
That's a question I would ask you guys because you're reading it for the first time, and I've read it before. And it's like, I know where this is going. It's like, what kind of genre would you put this in?
Well, Angela, you did a whole segment on New Weird or something like that, right?
I did, yes.
Fantasy.
And I think that's a very good category for it, New Weird, because lots of weird stuff happening. But so far we have, for example, kind of like some, almost 19th century technology, no? And then those remade people who can have mechanical arms or other mechanical body parts. Now that's almost a little bit steampunky from that point of view. But then all the organic, how shall I say, human hybrids, that have still some human parts, like Lynn, our female main character, who is half a human woman, and then has, instead of a human head, this scarab beetle on top. That's almost like like Frankenstein. So some type of weird how shall I say, evolutionary experiments or something like that.
Yeah, I never could determine whether that they were an actual race.
They are species.
Beings,
yeah, they're species. Yeah.
They are.
Or if they were biological engineered at some point in the past. And,
no, I don't think so. I think they're species. It's not explained, at least not in this early part, how they have evolved. But I mean, we have other species. We have the Garuda, those bird people, no?
The cactus people.
We have the cactus people.
Yeah.
You have the Vodyanoi, which are basically sort of mer people, but I guess the Vodyanoi is more like a Russian inspiration there. And I think it's an interesting thing that a lot of these terms, the names he takes for these species, are from our world's different mythologies. I think that's an interesting aspect to it. And one part is, of course, that there are these species that we've talked about, and there's hundreds or possibly thousands more, because it's a weird world. And then there's the remade. And I think that's for example is an important aspect, that like criminals get remade, or other people are possibly forced to be remade for like economic reasons and so forth, with machine parts, or having, you know, all kinds of other stuff, bodily things grafted on them, which is certainly more Frankensteinian in a way. And when you look at that from like a Marxist perspective, like having people be, you know, dehumanized in a lot of ways to perform material labor in a lot of ways, and actually becoming them more machine-like is a very it's very heavy-handed as symbolisms go, I guess. It's my point here.
Yeah.
I took the remade imagery in my head, and I thought, thinking very much about reality and expectations, because you have this person who is remade into a Garuda, who's supposed to be able to fly, right? He can't. It's fake. Everything that he's presenting is fake. And so I thought that was a symbolism there of this world, of the economy, of everything that's going on, and a lot of things is just it's fake. It's not real. And I thought that was very interesting imagery there for that. Some of the people, the way they are not real, and some of what they think is important is not real. I think it's kind of he's drawing into that idea of what is reality and what isn't, like what is what we perceive and what is in the reality. Are they the same thing?
Yeah, there's that too. But I think it's important that those people are remade against their will. It's not like they choose to do body modifications. They're like,
right.
The system or the state or the city or whatever you want to call it is doing it to them for all kinds of reasons. And I think that external force that is deforming people or dehumanizing people, I think that's an important aspect to it.
Talking about the criminal justice system, maybe a little jab at that. Definitely.
It is certainly connected to the criminal justice system, or for people who have to do that for, you know, to perform specific works, and then they get like harpoons attached and shit like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think there's also a difference between the bird man or person in the circus, no, that we encounter, who was remade into this, and then we have the other kind of like bird person, Jarrod, who has lost his wings, and that was a punishment as well in a
but he comes from a different society. He's an outsider, right?
Oh,
it's very clear that he comes from a different society. And there's an interesting question on, do you have any guess of what his crime was?
Yeah, because I was wondering this as well, because it's kind of explained, but it's hard to really grasp, because it's very, very abstract.
It is abstract.
Choice
and
theft
that
of
is
the
the crime,
degree.
right?
What?
Isn't that the crime? Being abstract? Wasn't that?
That's how it's described.
But
what does that actually mean? I mean, how can you be abstract?
It's something within his culture, you know, within his rules of being what is it, a chura or something like whatever he is, the bird person. He took somebody else's choice. What I got from it was that he made a choice for himself and not for the group. And that's why he was punished and lost his wings. But I could have missed something there.
Yeah, I thought it was choice as well. I thought it was his choices that he made a choice that took away somebody else's, or the choice of the group. He made a choice for himself, and that was what was taboo. That was what was not.
Yeah, that's an interesting framing, because everything in that culture is framed as taking away someone else's choice. They're like hardcore libertarian, I guess, in that regard. And it's interesting because every possible crime can be framed as a choice theft of different degrees. So the question is, what did he do? Because stealing something is choice theft. Murdering someone is choice theft. Other possible crimes, like every crime we can conceive, can be framed in, you know, taking away someone or a group's choice away up to a certain degree. So the question is very much, is he a criminal just in their culture, or is he a criminal, or did he do something that you or I, or, well, in this case, Isaac would consider a crime as well? Or is it more like, well, he did something in their culture, I don't care? And I think that's something that is important to keep in mind. Because it's very, very easy to slip into that, oh, it's super abstract, probably nothing, probably nothing really harsh, right?
That's very interesting, Raf, because they also, he also has his main characters dipping into the criminal underworld at certain points too.
Yeah.
So that theme runs throughout the first, probably the whole book, but at least the first 14 chapters, because you got Lynn working for the mob boss there, and Isaac, basically searching the criminal underworld for material, species and materials and what have you. So that's an interesting crossover there.
What is this mob boss? Have you guys put him together in your head and figured out what he looks like?
No, but I don't think you're supposed to. That's kind of the point, right? He possibly maybe even changes over time, because he is very much embodying change and liminality in that regard.
Shadia, I don't know even if I pronounce this right, says horror. Is horror part of this from a genre point, or?
Well, I was asking up to chapter 14. I've read the whole thing. I have a very definite answer, but I don't want to spoil anything for you.
Then maybe the others, perhaps.
I would say there's definitely aspects of body horror to this.
Yeah, especially with Mr. Motley, the mob boss, and like how he is described, all those, I don't know, waves of flesh and different kind of like fur, scales, whatever. He seems to have different several different mouths and eyes, so
the caterpillars might grow into something terrifying later on. That seems like potential for horror.
Yeah.
I would say the horror element for me was the remade. All of those people really kind of, gave this dark horror-esque feeling for me when I was reading about them, and their limbs are missing, but they're replaced by something else, like the freak show that they went to and saw that bird man. Like that just was eerie to me, so I do think, as we read further in, I do believe there'll be some more horror elements, kind of administered throughout the story.
And the interesting part is that, like, when they go to the carnival and to that freak show, there's a reason why we have the term freak show, right? This is maybe slightly exaggerated because it's a fantasy word, but it's not that far away from what we had up to like the early 1900s when we had, for example, human zoos and stuff like that. It's horrible and horrific in a lot of ways, but it is that because we kind of know that us out here, not in New Crobazon, we're not that far away from it, right? In principle, we're much closer than we might want to believe, I guess, is the point where the horror kind of comes from time to time.
Yeah, I also found this interesting that, we're introduced to the city and you already have this feeling a bit of this is a freak show, no? And then this gets again a different spin by introducing this circus, no? And I think it's called the Weird Circus at some stage as well.
Yeah.
So it kind of like seems to be as if we have several layers or strata of freakishness almost. When it comes to the remake, the most horrific example for me was the woman who had killed her baby.
Oh, yeah.
And where they then transplant the baby's arms and hands onto her face. I think that was for me where I was, okay, I didn't need that picture in my head. Thank you.
Yeah. It also reminded me, like, this isn't something, it reminds me, this isn't something people have chosen. This is not something, I literally would be really cool, like a tattoo, right? No, this is something that they're not chosen. And that anybody, it could find themselves in a situation where they are forced to become remade. Like it's not out of there's no boundaries to that. And I don't think, like, it feels like it's very much a threat that is in the background that everybody kind of aware of, but not talking about.
Yeah, and I just saw that. Yes, I think there's more than a hint that Mr. Motley did actually decide to be remade, if in case he is remade. In fact, he is remade. At least up to chapter 14, it feels very much like he is embodying what he does, and he believes in that. So yeah, I would agree with that.
At least he
Yeah,
tries to
definitely.
sell it like that. I think when he has this conversation with Lynn, and she asks him, "What are you?" He tries to sell it as if this is voluntary and this is
Yeah.
the new thing. Now this is what the future will be, and I'm much more the truth than anything else. No? But yeah, like Raf says, we have no idea yet. Is that actually the case or not? No.
It almost
Yeah.
feels like he thinks it's a form of art, right? Because he wants Lynn to do art based on his body, which is sort of in contrast with what Durkin says earlier on in the story, or at some point, about how remaking is the worst form of art or is a really gross form of art. But with Mr. Motley, it feels like he's adopted that and is trying to make something really artistic of it while still, sort of expressing all the horrors of remaking, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's certainly that aspect, and you definitely picked up on the right thing there. I think, Varsha, that that conversation about remaking being close to art or coming from the same wellspring as art, but being used for horrific ends. And I think at the end of the day, the question there is once again consent, because if you choose to be remade,
Mm.
that's up to you. But if the state does it to you or the system does it to you, then yeah, it takes away your choice. It's a choice theft, as they say.
Mm.
There
I
seems to be
definitely.
this. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There seems to be this like underlining obsession with transition within this. And I think that first scene, that lovemaking scene, I think between our two characters, he was watching the human progression of the neck move into the scarab head, and
Yeah.
he got he was kind of enthralled by that. And it's just my feeling that this is the same thing as the boss, that this man is over obsessed with the transition from being human to being either something else or something greater. I found that really interesting, and not sure if that is going to be more of a theme throughout the story or not. But I really enjoyed that, because now she's doing art and she's making the transit of the boss, and he's transitioning from everything, fur, scales to skin, and she's really focused on that. And I found that really intriguing.
Yeah, I think you're right. Transition states or liminality is very much a major theme of the story, whether it's how the city kind of changes from one thing into the other gradually and so forth. Even the art that Lynn does, right, is
Yeah.
kind of built into that, because she kind of excretes this gel basically that then hardens into something, and then she can sometimes maybe slightly remold it or something, but it's very much
Yeah.
about changing states in a lot of ways. And on the other hand, that's once again also what Isaac is kind of concerned with, right? Is changing states, or in his unified field theory of crisis energy, because that's why you get crises, right? Is you get a crisis in a transition situation, in that state of liminality. That's very much sort of where this is heading in a lot of ways.
I also got an idea of decomposition, of course, with that transition state, like decay to create something. Something is kind of like decayed and dying to create something new, right? And I think that's like, I don't know if that has to do with like what the world is doing. That the world is kind of like changing, molding, decaying, and creating life from that. I'm not sure if that's the imagery, but I got the feeling that the grossness that he trying to, like the grotesque that he tried to put in there, has a lot to do with decay, and I think that's a big thing in it as well. So I don't know if that's going to become a bigger thing as well in the story, and along with this idea of like the chaos energy and all this stuff too. Like if that comes into it at some point.
Well, I mean, decay is obviously something that comes up a lot, and as we said, like earlier, I think it was Dan who first talked about that, like how so much of the vocabulary is the language of is in a very organic language of like stench and putrefaction and all these wonderful words that you rarely use because they're kind of ugly. And even like when he describes how the city is like a wound in the land and stuff like that, it is very much tied to this organic processes in all kinds of ways. And yes, decomposition is very much part of that, I would say.
Yeah, that was a biological aspect to it that I was trying to get across, and I thought that was very throughout the whole book. It was like that, and I like I lost my train of thought. 1 second.
That's
Carry
okay.
on. Carry on.
I mean, if you use the biological aspect, I found it very interesting how, some of the poor people are like collecting bugs and they can make money by delivering them to certain scientists or something like that. I think, did I pick up on that correctly? A lot of people are picking up grubs and birds and selling them to other people, within the city.
Yeah, but once again, that's not too far away from like how poverty in, say, the industrial, like the 1850s or something happened, right? Large industry, for example, was rag picking, where you just it's what it says, and it's gross from like our modern, very sterilized world. It's extremely gross, and I think Mieville deliberately kind of taps into that fact that so much of life's processes have been alienated, I guess, from our personal experience at this point, because we've moved on in a way, and he kind of drags that back in this aspect of like how ugly or like how organic in a lot of ways life still is. The scene in the slaughterhouse is like a wonderful example for that, because that slaughterhouse scene is ugly as fuck. But it's a slaughterhouse. What do you expect?
Read the jungle.
That's the point. You can bet that like Mieville has read The Jungle, and I'm pretty sure that's it's almost like a deliberate like nod to The Jungle in that regard.
Yeah, and what I was going to say earlier was all those biological aspects, and he ties it so well into all the other pseudoscience that he brings into the book. The chemistry and you were talking about the physics and stuff like that, and he makes it all a part of the whole life cycle of all the sciences that he's describing, and I love how he did that.
Yeah, Paramita says about Mieville's writing, so good but too gritty. I feel the stench and filth too much. Would never be seen in New Crobuzon. And yeah, I have to agree. I wouldn't do a city break there in a hurry now. I mean, definitely one definite destination that's not on the list for holidays.
Well, but truly, I'm pretty sure New Crobuzon has its very nice parts as well. It's just that the characters that we see are part of the social underbelly. They're outcasts in a lot of ways, and they live in poverty. And there's like one scene, when they go out to talk to the Garudas, which absolutely fails for very reasonable or understandable reasons, but they get left in this like super nice neighborhood that has small gardens and a park and everything. There's good parts of New Crobuzon. We just don't see them because usually they're reserved for a very small elite and not exactly for the people that we talk to.
Yeah, I think also all the people that we meet are outsiders or outcasts of some way. At least our POV characters are. No? Lynn has left her hive because she didn't agree with how they got about making art. Isaac left the university because he was a crap teacher. So everybody we meet is kind of like some outsider. Then there is this journalist. What's her name? Forgotten her name.
Durkin,
but
I think.
Durkin.
Yeah.
no, she is also like on the fringes doing this illegal paper.
But she's
No,
also like a
so
renowned journalist, right? She comes from the upper class. She decides to be an ally to the lower classes, and I think that's important.
yeah, I mean Lynn also, no, she wasn't exiled, no, she left out of her own accord. No, she could have
Yeah,
stayed
although
with her
it is
wife.
very clear, I think it's very clear that the Khepri society, they're basically migrants. They live in their small like part of town, which is like a parallel society, and she steps out of that because she doesn't want to deal with the way. And there's a couple of passages where it's made very clear that Khepri society has turned inwards because of the persecution they suffer from humans in New Crobizon. So they turn inside and create these heroic statues because, that's what you get when you force a bunch of migrants into a place and treat them like shit. They usually become more nationalist in a lot of ways. It's not exactly unknown to happen in, places that are not New Crobizon. And I think that's sort of where she kind of that's part of the reason why she moves away. But Khepri in general are not necessarily upper class people in New Crobizon.
Yeah, I mean, New Crobizon is definitely very multicultural in some respects, but it's not seen as a positive value, no? Because, yeah, for example, Lynn's and Isaac's relationship, this affair or whatever you might call it that they have, no, they can't live that openly, if
I think
they
after
would
2 years, they can call it a relationship. I think it's sort of, I guess.
I guess, yeah, but it is not accepted in that world, no?
Yeah, that's the point. It is multicultural, but it's those cultures run in parallel. That's sort of the point. The Garuda are sitting out there in their towers, and there's that part about the Vodyanoi strike, like the port
Oh, yeah, the
workers,
dock
the harbor
workers,
workers,
yeah,
and how the humans are not partaking in the same strike. And that's something you look at, like labor history in the 19th and 20th century. For example, in the US, it took a long time for white mine workers to actually strike together with black mine workers, for example. So these elements are in that town as well. It's multicultural because it has all these different cultures, but they don't actually interact that much. There's very little intersectionality happening there.
I don't know. That happens in our own cities. I mean, from what I've heard, we're more racially segregated today than, at least in America, than we were in 1950s. You can, I grew up in an urban casino town in New Jersey, and when you go down the street, there are neighborhoods, and most of the races tend to stay within their neighborhoods, even up until this day.
Yeah, no, Osco Isco makes the same point, no, as an indigenous and Latino, this happens a lot in our communities in the States. And I think not just in the States, I think you can see this probably all over, no?
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's very deliberate on China Miéville's part. There's like a quote from Miéville that he made about Tolkien. I mean, he's talked a lot about Tolkien, and some of it is really funny if you don't mind him insulting Tolkien, and some of it is really valuable. But he says like the radical thing that Tolkien brought to fantasy was a world building in a secondary world creation, and most of fantasy has done fuck all with it, because the problem is if you invent a world as an artist from scratch, you can make that world whatever you want it to be, to do whatever you want it to do. And still most of fantasy just creates cheap knockoff medieval Europes, basically. And he goes in a very different direction, but all the bits and pieces that he does puts in there are there for a reason, and they are oftentimes reasons that go into like, let me show you what's going on in your city by making it even more extreme, by adding, scarab heads to people and having bird people in there. But the thing I'm describing is very much something that is happening in our world, because this is literature that is supposed to move you as a reader.
Yeah, and so I mean, insects anyway have this kind like growth factor, I think more so than anything else, no? And have been used in speculative fiction a lot to other, to kind of describe this ultimate other that we then loathe and want expelled.
Yeah, very much. I mean, he especially with the Kepri, I think he deliberately goes for like the I don't know, like alien feeling of having to encounter insects, which are very different from like humans. When you look at classic fantasy, you have your dwarves and you have your elves and whatnot, but they're all human shaped, right? They're basically human shaped, but smaller, larger, get older, look better, those kind of things. All the most of the species that he shows that he has in this world are deliberately alien. You have, cactus people, which are basically like ants, but more spiky, I guess. You have bird people, but you also have like Kepri, which are, human shape, except for the head. And they're like, holy shit. Also, apparently only for the female Kepri, because the male are just the scarabs, which, talk about being weird.
So when they refer to Xenians in the book, is it non-human species? Is that the implication that the city was built by humans in the beginning at some point, but now all the external or Xenian species are non-human?
I don't know if this...
Good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, but definitely the humans seem to call the shots in some respects. Also, if we look at their political system and how voting is organized,
Well, voting apparently doesn't work that well in Necrobicism. So Paramita asked about what we think about the names. Do you mean the names of places and species, or do you mean individual people names?
Yeah.
Just wondering. I mean, because there's something interesting to both. And I think part of what makes this world so fascinating is how many, words from our world he uses for species names. As I said, the Garuda and the Kepri and so forth. There's reasons where those come from in a way. And with some of the places as well. I don't know. Do I think that he names his main inventor guy Isaac has something to do with someone like Newton? Possibly.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we also have Lemuel Pigeon in this case, but of course there's Lemuel Gulliver, from Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah.
So I think the names are very well chosen. Also the species names are very well chosen, because the Capri is, it's an Egyptian god, which is represented the way how Lin is, so it's a human body with the beetle as a head, and the whole beetle, not just parts of it, but also and I did look it up. I confess my nerdiness got the better of me. It was a god that was representing the rising and moving of the morning sun, and the word itself also was used for expressing things like creation or making or something happening. And I think that's well chosen if we look at Lin, who is the artist, and is creating and making. And I think we find a lot of names like that in the book.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point.
I also took the names as another way of showing that is that there's a lot of this city that is human centric, because these names are not in these different species' language. They are all in a way that humans can pronounce it. Humans can talk about it. So I think this is also from a very human perspective. And so maybe these names are very much from a human point of view and how we see names, which helps us as a reader, but it also tells us how human-centric some of this city and culture really is that's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally called Xenos. They're literally called aliens.
Yeah.
That is a very anthropocentric way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
That's true. Going back to their relationship between Isaac and Lin, I did notice that even though their relationship is frowned upon and They try to hide it in many cases. But also a lot of people around them kind of already know about their relationship, and they don't make a big deal of it between them. And I'm wondering if we're yet to see some further conflict down the road that might arise due to that relationship, because we haven't seen any ramifications yet other than them worrying about it, really.
Yeah, and isn't it like really interesting the way that is framed, which is that in like Lynn's artist circles, it's kind of okay for them to have that let's call it interracial, let's call it by what it stands for. In those like more liberal minded and also obviously sort of outside of core society areas, no one cares about it that much, but they keep it a secret for Isaac's need to sometimes show up at university and be in what you might call higher society. And that once again I think is very important, because things like the intermingling of different cultures and so forth has always been much easier, I guess, in the lower classes, because everyone's poor and shit like that, and is really enforced. Cultural norms are really heavily enforced in well, I guess I can just call it the bourgeoisie at this point, but you know what I mean.
Nobility of some sort.
Yeah.
Well, the people in charge.
Yeah.
There's definitely some kind of class system going on, though. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
No.
But
And it doesn't surprise me that Melville is calling that out too. It's kind of showing that a little bit. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all.
I guess he would have to, give back his party membership of the British Socialist Party if he would not mention the fact that there are such things as classes. Which, I agree with him. So one thing that I found interesting as well is like how he slowly introduces the whole stuff about society, how he does that, because we kind of know there's Parliament, but the only time we see Parliament in those first chapters is when we find out how they obviously check everyone's mail and have like heavy surveillance, and B, well, there's a lot of shady business going on there.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the whole political system is really, very strange. So we have a parliament. The members there are voted for, but not everybody can vote. Some seem to, I think it's called, have an indigenous vote, if I remember right. But the majority of people, it's a lottery to get suffrage, to get the ability to vote. It's not explained how high the percentage then is of people who actually can win that lottery. So we have no idea how many people then in the end are actually able to vote. And then we have what's referred to as the militia, some type of, I don't know, police, military, whatever.
Oh, they haven't shown up yet, but
they haven't really shown up yet, but they're hinted at by being hinted at certain buildings where they're in and what those buildings look like and stand for.
I think if you imagine stuff like Stasi and Gestapo, you're not too far off here.
Yeah.
They're certainly the enforcers in a bad way. And it's made very clear that they have a ton of like informers everywhere, listening everywhere. There's a lot of paranoia going on, with the renegade rampant, and in that part, there's like the constant fear that like someone may be, an informer for the militia. So that level of paranoia is certainly in there. Yeah. I guess.
I like that the political aspects are sort of in the background at the moment, that they may or may not become important later on, but they're not affecting our characters right now because they're not potentially doing anything that might draw their attention. So even though there's this huge, possibly negative seeming political aspect of the city, it's not a main part of the storytelling because it's not affecting our characters yet. So when it becomes important, it'll become really important, if it becomes important, I suppose. So I like that.
Yeah. And I think that's an important aspect that you just brought out, Varsha, because yeah, for a lot of people on the like lowest end of society, the day-to-day operation of the government just really doesn't matter. You can't influence it, and it rarely touches you, except for like the broad strokes that delineate like how much agency you actually have in your system. But the day-to-day operation of Parliament has no impact on someone who's scrabbling to just survive. Just like how it is.
Yeah.
I
That
found
makes sense. Yeah.
it was interesting. I found like the underbelly and what was going on with like the criminals affected them much more. They were much more interested in what was going on there, and kind of much more to do with their society than actually the actual the government, because it seems like that's where they were getting a lot of their resources. That's where they were getting their information in a lot of ways, because they had ties because everything corrupt. They had ties to things, listening ears. So I thought it was interesting that we see more of the underbelly with that, because that is a huge part of their internal government, almost for them, more than the parliament, because it's so far removed from them.
Yeah. Kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah, I think as well that it's important that as only some people get access to actually have like a direct vote, also a lot of people seem not to be affected by whatever legislative power the parliament seems to have. This area where Isaac goes then to meet the Garuda in his totally misguided attempt of intercultural communication.
I think that chapter is one of the most powerful ones of the entire thing.
Pardon?
That chapter there, when they go to the spattering, is probably one of the most powerful bits of that first part that we're talking about today, because of it, how it observes how city development works, how the idea of different groups living parallel societies work, the fear and the building up of gangs to for mutual defense and so forth. That's how organized crimes kind of starts. All those groups are basically self-defense organizations, and you see the same kind of thing forming with the Garuda, because they have to be afraid, because rich people will probably just take advantage of them and just kill them, because that's inhuman to them in a lot of ways. So to have that whole thing, it's a good showcase of how city development oftentimes works outside of very small European cities where you don't have much of that happening, but like how the outskirts kind of get taken over by people who are really bad off, and who are in this weird conflict, in that conflict zone between trying to establish themselves and build themselves up, but also being sort of the place where everyone else takes out their frustration and anger on those people. And you can go to France to find out how that works.
Oh yeah, the banlieue, no?
For example, the banlieues are a very interesting, idea for that, I guess.
Yeah. Spatters also reminded me a little bit of any type of shanty towns, or slum areas that cities develop, and not just non-European cities. I think almost all cities have some aspect of that.
Yeah, at least after a certain size, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I wonder if he's going to try to bring in gentrification later.
I think it's already there.
You think so?
Already there. The way how some parts of the city have changed either to the better or the worse, or no. So I think that's already maybe not fully spelled out, but it's definitely already kind of like in there in the mix.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's certainly happening. It's not been a major focus yet, but it's certainly happening. I mean, it's a city. Gentrification is something that we've always done to cities. It's just like over the last couple of decades, we've kind of really ramped it up in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about Isaac taking on this job that he really doesn't seem yet to know what to do? How much of a big risk was that on his part? He was offered a lot of money, but it reminded me of a friend of mine who used to take on computer coding jobs and not know how to computer code yet, and then we go look it up after the fact. But it kind of reminded me of that. So because he did a lot of research after the fact, and how big of a risk was that for him to take that on like that?
There didn't seem to be any spelling out of consequences if he wasn't successful. Yeah.
But
I mean, that was very easy for him. It's like, well, if I can't make you fly, too bad, I guess. But I think like a lot of what Isaac is doing and how Isaac is working and what Isaac's storyline goes about is very much like the ethics of research and like should you do these things and how far down, what can you do, what is still like okay, should you fill your entire workroom with like bunch of animals and not care when they die. There's a lot of ethics questions with Isaac's research, and he thinks that he left because he was a shit teacher.
Yeah,
but there's always the question of whether there might have been some ethics violations in his past.
Right.
Not that the university looks.
You definitely wouldn't have any chance at today's universities. I can't see him applying for research funding.
What is he doing?
I took that as like that blind, like so there's a lot of research that are being done that is just the possibility, and you build a thesis from just the possibility of being able to do something. And I feel like that's just taking that and like, is that a good idea? Like when you're leaving ethics behind to follow this big grand, this big grand idea, like, is that okay? To do the ends justify the means is always something big when it comes to any kind of story about research, but also is talking about research in general as far as Isaac's just jumping at the chance. Like there are scientists that are jumping at research that they should not have be doing. I mean, that should never have been done, and it causes problems later on down the road. And this is kind of showcasing that as well, I think.
Especially where we leave off towards the end of chapter 14, where he's got his big theory about, crisis theory and watercraft, and how that has much bigger implications than just for Yahrek's wings. I think, that sort of sent chills, right? Because this, the first thing that's going to happen with whatever he comes up with is you'll make some new form of weapons of destruction. So,
I mean, he's giving wings to someone who fights from the air. He's weaponizing Yarek in a way, to be frank.
Yes,
just a quick
without
thing.
knowing what his crime really was, no?
I mean, keep that one in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Not because he has no idea. Was this guy, I don't know how to say it, but justly punished, for a better expression? No, I mean, we always hope that punishments then are just. So was this justified or not? No, what crime did he actually commit? He seems not to be even very interested. No, he asks him a little bit, but when he gets an explanation, oh yeah, sure, okay. When he meets Lemuel, he then inquires a bit more. Now, what do they mean when they say somebody is an abstract person? And he gets a bit more of an explanation. But it seems not to really, how shall I say, influence his decision. Does he want to take on the job or not? I mean, Isaac mirrors Lynn in a way, no? Lynn takes on this commission and she hasn't a clue what she's in for.
Yeah, but Lynn, at least we know, has the skill to do the job. Like
maybe
she's not,
we don't really know yet, no?
But I think it's important to see that those two kind of the things that happen there, they parallel, they mirror each other, right? They both take on something that kind of goes to the core of who they are, because Lynn at her heart is an artist who wants to break the mold and do, in those fancy words, art for art's sake in a lot of ways. And Isaac is the same kind of thing as, I guess, a scientist. He wants to find out new things and he doesn't care about the consequences. And neither does Lynn in her art thing. And it's important to see how when you look at how the chapters are arranged.
Yeah.
At the beginning, the chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, I mean, the whole part is called commissions, right? How that it is deliberately made to mirror each other, those two arcs, Isaac's arc and
they both
Lynn's
understand that about each other too, which I think is very interesting. Like they know, like, oh, I know he doesn't want to be disturbed because when he's doing his research, and she doesn't feel bad about that. She's more just like, okay, because I don't like being disturbed when I'm doing my art, so I get it. And so I think that kind of interesting is that they get each other in that way, and that their roads are being very paralleled and their attitudes are kind of paralleled, I think are really showing us kind of the different, like how art and science and the dangers of both there's dangers to both of those things, and either going too far or jumping in when you really shouldn't, that type of thing. I think it's showing that the interesting implications of both of those things. I thought that it was interesting in blending those together in a way that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like that part at the core of, like, I don't want to say human, because, like, human kind, or in this case obviously also the other species, but like that's sort of at the core of that, like that creative spark, our ability to do new things, to be demiurges basically. And what you should know from your Gnostic past is, like, the demiurge is the bad guy. There's doing new shit has consequences, and they're often pretty fucking dark. Quick thing for Catherine there. I don't remember any vivisection, so no trigger warning for you there. It's still dark, don't get me wrong, but I don't remember any vivisections.
I think the vivisections happened off screen.
Yeah, possibly, but you don't get any descriptions of that, so you can read on, still carefully. Oh, the sections in first person, Kadia, I don't know. Yes, there's two of them.
Yes, there are.
Before chapter 14, and from what I remember, there's usually one near the end of one of those. I mean, there's different parts, right? There's usually one at the end of a part. So there's the introduction when, I guess we can assume Jarrod comes to the city. And then there's one at the end of the section called the part 1, which is commissions, when he talks about, how he's in the city and how he doesn't understand the city Garuda, who are, speak their own language and their own dialect, and he just doesn't get it because there's the cultural divide between the old school badass Garuda from the desert and, the people that have to live in the system under capitalism. And then, there will be more. But that's sort of
I think that first person is it's Jarrod, but we just don't know right from the start. No, it's the opening passage where he enters the city, but we don't know who that person is at that stage. We only know that at the end of the first part when we have met him. No, so until then we have no idea who that first person perspective is referring to. No.
There's a
Which
mention...
I find interesting. I think it's definitely an interesting literary device, no?
Yeah, because they are from Jarrod. So the question is, like, because they frame the whole thing, right? Like, Jarrod's voice as a first-person voice is the first we hear. So the question is he actually our first-person narrator, and it's the frame for the whole thing?
Like, is he the narrator of the whole story, of the other parts as well? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah, as Paramita, yes, I think so the question, like, Isaac definitely is a true scientist in that older definition of scientist. Like, does he pass current scientific method muster? No, he doesn't. But he's certainly, I think that connection to, say, to Newton certainly makes sense, because Newton, as we kind of know, spent a whole lot of time doing alchemy and all kinds of other crazy shit, besides, getting hit by apples, I guess. And so, yeah, he's certainly a scientist in that he wants to find new knowledge that explains how the world works. In that case, I would say he embodies the true scientist. His methods, kind of shoddy.
Well, I don't think he's a scientist in our modern sense. He's more like a Renaissance man, perhaps, no? Who tries to venture into other, how shall I say, not necessarily natural science areas like philosophy. No?
He's doing
So,
natural philosophy, as they say,
Yeah.
or used to say back in the day.
yeah.
But yeah, I
Mm.
think that inquisitiveness, that willingness to just go ignore all problems and go past every possible hindrance to find out what really happens, and to get that secret knowledge. I think that's very much at the core of what he does, which is very much how unfettered science kind of works, and suddenly you happen to have become a death destroyer of worlds or things like that. It happens because that's how science works. That's how humans work. We tinker with shit until something explodes, and then we're like, oh, what do we do about that?
Yep.
To be fair,
it's
that's
also
how I
interesting
operate
that the
my life
scientist
as
is
well.
a human. Do you think that has significance? That the scientist is human and not one of the other races?
All three in Isaac's warehouse are human,
Are
right?
human, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe humans had better access to education, and therefore they would have
Okay.
had that.
Yeah, they do have. I mean,
that
it's
chance.
kind of made clear when he talks about how there's like one Garuda or at university or something, because most of the people at university are humans. So humans are kind of the top dogs in New Chromosome.
But it also may have something to do with the fact that as humans, we may not even know to call what the other races are doing science when it actually, for them, absolutely is. They're testing things out. They're doing different things. But our human, like, because we're human, we think that we're above it. We wouldn't call it science. It's like we're calling things science that we think are science, but we're not looking at it from their perspective either. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think humans certainly have the hegemony over structured education in the city, which is, the university and so forth. That's run by humans.
Yeah,
although the Garuda obviously do have their own library. What?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, you're correct. You're very absolutely right. And humans do run the education in the city, which would be would absolutely show us like what we would think of as as science would be in a human terms. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I just think it would be interesting to see the other species and what they wonder about, what they would be curious, what they would spend their time researching. I think that would be an interesting thing to see.
Well, the Garuda do have a library.
Interesting point that Mary makes, because I think at some stage somebody actually comments on this and says that a lot of what's going on in the city has a very anthropocentric worldview, and it also seems to be that other, how shall I say, the other races or species that we find in the city seem to be much more glued into the fact, or have more self-awareness that there are others existing, and that they might have, at least an equal standard of thinking and exploring. And humans are portrayed by those other races as quite arrogant as well. No? So,
yeah, but, I mean, that's kind of at the core of like what we would call privilege today. Like humans have, they have human privilege. They don't see those other things. They don't see that because they're the people in charge. But if you don't have that privilege, you're much more aware of those aspects of that privilege of others, and you're much more aware and able or capable, I guess, but potentially capable of seeing the lack of privilege in other unprivileged groups, basically. And I think that's sort of what you see there, that humans are in charge.
That makes me kind of wonder what Mr. Motley's end game is with becoming essentially not human, and with all the what do you call the graphs?
Yeah, I think that's why it's so interesting that he gets pissed off when Lynn asks him what he started out as, because I don't think he sees himself as an individual, as just himself. He's not part of any of these groups at this point. So tying yourself to a specific cultural identity, I think, is sort of what he's very much against.
But he has power, and so at what point is that going to come into play, where he doesn't want to be seen as just a human? He wants something more. I'm just trying to look into the future a little bit, but
well, I mean, he's a drug lord. We know that.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and we kind of know that he's tied to what's his name, Lucky Gazid. So he's potentially tied to the dream shit, and then you can extrapolate from there. I guess.
Yeah, I think. I mean, he's basically a drug dealer, no? That's what he makes his money with.
I think you can call him a bit of more like, a mob boss.
A mob boss,
yeah. He's very much a mob boss at this point.
Yeah, but I mean, he's not a street dealer, but drugs seems to be what he's making his money with.
And I think that's why it made him uncomfortable whenever Lind refused, because I think that's how he's used to having power. He's used to having control, is using the drugs. And when she was like, no, I don't want that, he's just kind of like, okay, what can I use to really have you just kind of under my power a little bit more?
Yeah.
Kingpin.
Yeah, Kingpin, yeah.
I love the fact that like Isaac's favorite beer is called Kingpin. It's one of those neat small details. I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah, I think that's what this makes a really outstanding book is that while the city is described as very anarchic, organically grown, the text itself is very carefully crafted.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No?
I agree.
Like the prose is just wow.
Yeah. I agree.
I agree too.
Yeah,
go ahead, Jarrod.
No, go ahead.
I love the comparison of Isaac to Perdido Street Station, and also, I guess, in some ways, the book is like the author's description of Perdido Street Station. Everything passes through here. It's a mishmash of all kinds of things, which also the book feels like it is. I love the writing. It felt very dreamy and pretty in some places, but also very effective when bringing out some of the, I guess, revulsive reactions to some things that were described. So, I thought it was done very well. Yeah.
Yeah, he used
kind of like the fact that Isaac is not white.
I didn't pick up on that.
I didn't pick up on that either.
Yeah.
No.
There's like two mentioned where it's talked at some point his dark skin is mentioned.
Yeah, you know what? I think I remember where that was.
And at one point his skin is compared to the color of burnt wood, something like that. So
okay.
Okay, right.
He's not white.
Okay.
I just thought everybody living in that city has just like a filter of dirt over them. That's how I really, because it, like when you get back to the writing, he created such an amazing city with, with all the words he used. He just filtered it with you were talking about earlier. Decay and filth and at times there were beautiful things, but just the way he developed the tone of this city was exceptional throughout his writing, in my opinion.
Yeah, he used a lot of descriptives that involved all the senses that you could like smell and taste and sound and everything, every sense you could imagine was involved in his descriptions of everything around them. It was very.
I like
very
how it was
nice
done
prose.
as well, and slowly done. As you were in one section, and then a few more chapters more. You get it starts building and building and building, rather than just like an info dump. Oh, here's where this place is. This place is here. This is who stays there. This is the thieves area, and this is the bridge to that. I really love that. The the claws that are coming out of the ground, the rib cage that is around Perdido Street Station. I think there's a tower for the militia just the way they're done with the strings across the city that are linking other people, and I just thought it was so atmospheric, his writing, and
Yeah.
it really drew me into the world.
Speaking of the rib, what is it? Is it the insides of a really large creature of some sort, or is it a city put together with bones?
The architect said he was building a god, I believe. I think that's why he was sent to a mental institution. But yeah, you have these ribs, coming out of the ground. But the way it was built, and I guess Perdido Street Station, inside of that and converging with 5, tunnels and things like that. And I just I really enjoyed his visualization and how he crafted this city.
Yeah, the city is deliberately very weird and alien. I mean, I found it interesting. Perdido Street Station is sort of like at the center of the city in a way, and this huge agglomeration of just towers and stuff, with all the different like train lines and stuff connecting to it, basically crossing at that point. It kind of reminds me a bit of Central Station in Central Station by Lavi Tidar, which is, of course, in this case, based on an actual central bus station in Tel Aviv. But this idea of having this,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, having this huge like center of like public transport that then morphs into this, everything basically, like a microcosmos, basically within the center of the city.
Yeah. Central Station felt very bright and cheery in its descriptions, and this is kind of the exact opposite. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. It feels very similar, I suppose, in terms of the centrality of the station.
Yeah. Central Station is a very happy book compared to Perdido Street Station. It's a great one, though. You should definitely go and read it. It's really good.
I second that.
Yeah, so okay, the Prose as a mashup of Peak and Lovecraft. Yeah, I can see that.
I agree.
There's a lot of Lovecraft in there. I think, Peak, up to a point in like the vocabulary, just like the words he uses. I think there's a lot of Peak in there. And I think what's interesting is, and you just said that like he works with all the senses, and it's one of those like, we tell people that start out writing, good writing is, engaging different senses. It's the kind of thing you tell your growing game masters in Dungeons and Dragons as well. It's like, just don't give just visual descriptions, talk about auditory, sensory, all the different sensory inputs. It's kind of what we tell everybody. But you rarely see someone be as like on the nose with it, and focus heavily on, especially on odors. Like there's a lot of smell going on in the city.
There is,
and I think up to a point it works really well that he has Lynn the Kepri as one of his characters, because he does do that shift of sensory input very well when he switches from one character to the next, and suddenly you have the pheromones, you have all these things going on and you're like, I really have to pay attention, because it's not just visuals, and even the visuals are weird now because they're non-human visuals.
I really like how he crafted the city as like a living thing. At the beginning, the guy, it will swallow you up, and I just love that, and that that does happen. People go to New York City and never leave, or are never able to leave, and I just love that description of he basically made this city a living thing in
which is really interesting, because you're right. I agree with you there. I think it's really interesting because that's like a trope almost, or like at least a phrase or an image that you use a lot, for example, in your very, very specific urban genre that is not urban fantasy, which is obviously the hard-boiled detective novel. And there's so many like hard-boiled detective that have these exact like those phrases, like the sweetie swallows you up. Terry Pratchett parodies that in
Sin City, the movie Sin City actually says that, this city will swallow you. I think those were exact words as well.
Yeah, and I think he deliberately takes elements from that. He goes much harder on that in The City and the City, which is a police procedural. But that idea of the city as a character, as a living being, as an entity that swallows up humans and changes them and does something with those people that, or people in general. I shouldn't call them humans in this kind of setting, but you know what I mean. As
Humanoids.
like yeah, the city as an entity, as a possibly very dark and dangerous entity that you can, that is very difficult to escape from. And he doesn't even call it like, I don't think he calls it a black hole. There's like at the beginning, this idea that the city kind of just is a center of gravity that just draws everyone in and just swallows everything and just turns it into, well, something else. I think that process is really interesting there. And I think it's a deliberate nod to the hard-boiled kind of genre in a lot of ways.
And it makes me wonder what the connection is between the science that they're trying to do, the chaos, right? Science and what they're trying to understand, and this being that they're living on, and what the connection there is, and like how that's going to interplay with the story. Like, how is the living being, like, are we going to understand this living being that they're living on more? Or are we going, or is it going to continue to just be this mysterious thing? Like, it just kind of, I'm curious to see where that goes in that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot more world building coming up, which I can't wait to get into.
Yeah, me too. I really very curious on how, what other aspects of that city we might get to see, and if it's kind of like just how much more of the underbelly of the city we're also going to see. What I also found interesting when we were talking about how it's written, the prose, it doesn't feel info dumping at all. There's so much exposition going on with the world building, because he has to introduce us to all the different parts of the city and the structure of it and the different species and races in the city. But I never had really this feeling of, oh God, here we go again.
Yeah.
Well, he just embeds his world building information in all these different bits. You don't get like someone just telling you, and this is how it works. You don't get the usual like dialogue where you have the mentor telling you everything, or someone reading a book or whatever. It's like, no, you're in that city. All you get is that introduction through Jarrod's eyes when he drives into the city. You're like, okay, this is a mess.
Even when Isaac was giving his lesson on his various scientific theories, it still felt very in the story and part of the story.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you were in a classroom going,
Yeah. Yeah, I like the... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm good. I agree with the whole thing.
I was saying that I like what you said, Jarrod, that I like that description of the science because he was talking to Jarrod. It was part of a dialogue. And similarly, when we were being shown around Isaac's warehouse, the consequences of the underground request that he put out for all flying things, he showed us by giving the tour to his roommates, right? So it wasn't, oh, here, let me just like tell the reader what's going on in this room. It's through a dialogue with the other characters. So it felt really organic, I guess.
Oh, one thing I really wanted to point out is like the curses they use when they swear by their different gods.
Yes.
And that all of those are also about feces, which once again ties into the smell. And he's always talking about what's his god's name, Jabber shit. And I'm like,
he's got a knack for putting words in the exact right place when he's writing, and it's just, and they're like he's like other authors where everyone is pretty heavy, and you really want to stay on top of what he's saying and in that scene. And I hate to keep going back to the beginning, but I really love that boat ride into the city. And I live outside of a major metropolitan city, and I take a train in, and I'm always watching, and I like to describe it as the evolution. I come from like the suburbs, and you get into that, you go all the way in, and you're seeing the scenery change to smaller buildings get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you disappear into a tunnel, and you come out to Center City, Philadelphia, and you just walk out. They're like he was giving it to you as you were walking through a city and walking through with Lynn and with Isaac, and it was just like Varsha, it was just very organic, and I just really enjoyed how it was done by Mieville.
Yeah.
I agree.
We
Good.
seem to have lost Raf. Not sure what happened there. Yeah, so
He got swallowed by the city.
They do
That's
that.
that's it. Yeah, or made the wrong choice and got punished or something like that.
Yeah.
I
They
think
cut
he's
his
back.
internet.
I think he's back. Now
It
he's
certainly
back.
Oh, there he is.
There he is.
Certainly did my internet for some reason.
Yeah.
I was like, why is
Cut your
everyone so
internet
quiet?
instead of
Oh,
your
shit.
wings.
Yeah, I did maybe commit a choice theft of some degree.
That must have been it. We were thinking that ourselves here. Yeah.
Although I will say this, I did not commit the kind of choice theft that Jarrod did commit.
Oh no.
Oh, say no more. Say no more.
Oh,
Yeah,
hint,
don't ruin
hint,
nothing.
huh?
It would be very difficult for me to commit that alone in my room in front of my webcam at this point in time.
Is there just one more book? It's The Scar is after this?
Yeah.
The Scar
there
is
are
the
two more
next,
books,
and then Iron
actually.
Council.
Yeah.
Okay, is that out?
Those two are both out, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're all out. I mean, Perdido Street Station was published in 2000, and I think the other two very short after that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he just moved on to do all kinds of weird things. And the last book he wrote was about the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah, he seems to have moved completely into non-fiction at this stage. So I don't know what's going on.
I don't know. Like he did the one October on the October Revolution, and then after that he did The Last Days of New Paris, which is obviously a fiction book. And then
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's a weird one. It's a really weird one. And then he went and did the thing on the Communist Manifesto.
Is it new weird?
It's
probably the newest of new weird. Like who knows?
Well, it's basically so the basic premise of the Last Days of New Paris is that in defense of Paris against the Nazis, the Surrealists found a way to make some of their Surrealist art pieces come alive to fight against the Nazis, and that is just the beginning.
Okay.
Just saying.
Onto the TBR, then I would say.
It is certainly a strange experience.
Taking all, trying to kill Nazis. Is that what it was?
Well, it's.
Surreal might be. Is that Van Gogh? Not Van Gogh. I'm sorry, Dali.
Dali is certainly a surrealist,
Dali.
yes, and there's André Duchamp and diverse others. The surrealist movement was very much, a radical movement of artists in like the 1930s, 20s, and 30s, and apparently, the exquisite corpse game is one of the things they played. The kind of thing where someone draws like a head and then you fold it over and you pass it on to the next person. They draw like a neck and shoulders and you pass it on and fold it over and you pass it on to the next person. And that's how you create art, to kind of break out of these molds of creating deliberate art, I guess, is part of what they did.
Yeah, they were very much into kind like inspired by Freud and his ideas of the subconscious, and tried different types of automatic writing, automatic painting, drawing.
Yeah. And they're one of those like art movements that started to write their own like manifestos and stuff. André Breton is the one who did like all the manifesto writing and not so much of the painting, I guess. Although I think he did also paint some.
What you were describing, Raf, sounds like the remade. Somebody is drawing the head and taking it to somebody and they're putting on a freaking shoulder, and next thing you know, you have this weird looking human, with steam coming out of it and pulleys and stuff.
Yeah, although I guess the difference is that the remade are made with a purpose, and the whole point of those exquisite corpse drawings and stuff like that is to channel something subconscious, as Angela said about the the Freudian part. I mean, it's the 30s. Everyone is fucking around with the subconscious, whether it's a collective one or not.
Mm. And also very anti-bourgeoisie, so very anti-middle class as a movement. So
yeah, which is why which is
probably attraction for Mieville, no? Who
very much, which is why it pissed off Adorno so much once all the surrealists also
Adorno
sold out.
hated them. Adorno totally hated them.
No, he loved them back when he wrote the what's it called, Dialectics of Enlightenment, but he gets really pissed off once they sell out and do the art world business thing and not just angry modernist art.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it's very much beyond this conversation, I hope.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think it does have some bearings on I mean the ideas of creativeness and art that are in Perdido Street Station as well, no? The way how Lynn creates basically with her R's, no? That's very how shall I say, Breton or
well, I mean, Duchamp's the famous one, Fountain.
The Fountain, no? Which is basically a man's urinal upside down. So I think it does have a bearing on how
and
how art is portrayed and what art is supposed to do in this novel.
Yeah, and you can definitely you can bet your ass that China Mieville read his Frankfurt School. He's done some critical theory in his day. I'm sure it has happened.
And is this related to also the magazine they're trying to do in secret? And maybe somebody can remind me
a little bit,
exactly
I think,
what they're trying to accomplish with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an underground newspaper, and you always had those, but they've always been sort of like a underground thing, all the way to like the anarchist kind of zine culture from like the 60s and 70s in that area.
Yeah, or you could also look at if we want to stay with the 20s, 30s, not the art movement just before the Surrealists, the Dadaists, who very much had a magazine culture going. And
That's
were
true.
publishing their art in kind of like in a magazine form. No?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It definitely is a place for people who doesn't fit into the mold can get read by people who would appreciate it. So yeah.
Yeah, and banning newspaper is certainly something that authoritarian regimes have never done before, right? It's never happened.
Yeah.
No, I just read Fahrenheit 9/11. What a good book.
Yeah. There's that.
Yeah.
I think it's important to, and I think that's interesting because, and this will probably be a question will be interesting to look at over the next couple of chapters and so forth. Like when we talked about the politics, because it's easy to go like, oh, he's a lefty, he'll hate the government. It's like, but parts of this feel much closer to like your authoritarian regime as portrayed in say 1984 than they do as you know what I mean. It's not a monarchy. It's a weird parliamentarian thing that operates in weird, unguessable, and unknowable ways to keep a system down, and that can be seen as a critique, especially with like the way the militia, with all the paranoia of the secret police snooping everywhere. That feels much more as like being inspired by certain Stalinist, to put it mildly, systems of the Eastern Bloc. So there's certainly a level of awareness that it's not a pro. Let's go. It's not a pro-Soviet book in that regard. I think, and I think it's, for me, it had that sort of vibe, especially with like a lot of the elements of like the darkness, or like also the organic elements being sort of like the scary part. It had a resonance with 1984 to me. Those bits when he talks about the government and the militia.
Definitely.
Which is not that much, though, I admit.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts, ideas? I mean, we've covered a lot by this stage.
Yeah, we did.
So
And with all that said, it's actually I find it a very fun story too. I think it's a blast to read. I went through it very quickly.
yeah, it's surprisingly easy, surprisingly easy read, I must say as well. Also the pacing is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in the world and almost as much as I am in the character. So that also makes it like no matter what he's writing about or what he's focusing on, I'm here for it, which makes that always helps with pacing and wanting to read more and learn more. So I really enjoyed his writing style.
Yeah, and I think one of the advantages, and why it is so fun to read this, is that he is very deliberately breaking all the like tropes and all the conventions of fantasy. It's like you can't just assume anything. You have to pay attention and look at what's being going to be around the next corner, because you can't assume, unlike you can with like a lot of other fantasy. You're just like, I need to pay attention because there's probably going to be something really strange and not just another orc.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into the political system of this world, and just I hope that gets fleshed out a little more as we keep reading along, because I always like to get that perspective, and hopefully that provides context for how our protagonists act throughout the story, whether they do something, because at this time I don't know if what Isaac is doing with trying to rebuild these wings, if that really is a horrible thing or not at this moment, or if that is frowned upon, or maybe I just missed something. I'm not sure.
Well, he's done something terrible.
But terrible in the Charrúda society, which could mean something totally different to us. And that's what I want a little more context into, to see, and as well as this city. I want to see what Lynn's people are like. We're going to have these different cultures, and I'd like them to be a little more fleshed out as we go through.
Sure.
Yeah, and I also definitely, and I feel like the reason that we are assuming that Isaac is doing this without any thoughts of the repercussions of, because like what could go wrong, when actually it could be that we as the reader in this culture don't understand what the repercussions of him building these wings would be yet. And I think that's part of the story, and I'm excited to see that and to figure that out, like what the repercussions are. And I don't even think Isaac really knows. So I think we're going to learn along with him. So I think that's going to be interesting, and to see like what are the different repercussions of going against these different cultures, as they are. So I think it could be interesting.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, kind of like, will those different plot strands that we have at the moment, will they meet at some stage? So at the moment, Lynn does her thing and she keeps it secret from Isaac, and Isaac also doesn't tell her kind of like exactly what he's up to. So will that change in the future for the book? Or the same with Birkin and her paper?
Will those three meet again?
Exactly. Yeah.
There's going to be some thunder. I can promise you that. I'll hold up on the rain, though.
I hope so. I mean, I think that's what we're all here for.
I'm definitely willing to trust the writer at this point, that he'll take us there.
Yeah. I mean, I know where it's going, and I can. Yeah. There's going to be some surprises.
I want to know what happens to that caterpillar that Isaac had.
Oh, yeah. That caterpillar. I can tell you, you'll find out some things, Varsha.
Okay. I'm excited.
Something does happen.
It's a caterpillar that's on drugs. It's
I
very
see
much a
that,
drug
yeah.
caterpillar.
Definitely see that coming. That's I can't wait.
I don't know why, but I had the Jurassic Park theme running in my head whenever those were introduced. I was like,
Yeah, because you have that whole like high security thing going on, right?
Mm, yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, the caterpillar should be in this high security lab, no?
Mm,
And it isn't, because this guy who checks the mail kind of like pocketed it and sells it
Yeah.
on.
yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And I mean, with the security and the biohazard signs on the door,
Mhm.
do we want that thing actually let loose in New Corpusson?
Yeah.
And on drugs. Let's not forget that.
mhm.
It's Jurassic
Okay.
Park meets Cocaine Bear, right?
Okay.
I love that. I'm all in for that.
Right, so. Yeah. Okay.
All red
Will we wrap it
herrings.
up, or are there any last thoughts?
No.
No? Yeah, okay, then thank you everybody for
Thank you.
discussing
Thank
and
you.
being
Thank you.
here, and also thank you to the people in the chat. And yeah, till the next discussion in roughly 2 weeks. Is that correct? I think so, no? So
2
yeah.
weeks, yeah.
Yeah, okay, until then. Bye
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.